Think about the dashboard of your car for a second. You're just driving down the interstate trying to make good time, and suddenly that little red check engine light just flickers on.
Oh, man. It's the ultimate unwanted interruption, isn't it? Just an immediate flashing signal that something under the hood desperately needs your attention.
Right. And before the whole system breaks down, right? And when it happens, you don't just ignore it. I mean, you certainly don't pat the dashboard, step harder on the gas, and praise the car for building character by driving with misfiring spark plugs.
No, of course not. You'd pull over. You'd figure out what's wrong.
Exactly. But when it comes to our own lives specifically, when our internal check engine light illuminates in the form of feeling just totally drained, joyless, or craving a break, we tend to do the exact opposite.
We really do. We've all been completely marinated in this cultural programming of, no pain, no gain.
Yeah. We treat the hero's journey as if it inherently requires us to be miserable.
And we culturally code the desire for comfort as like a character flaw. There's this massive assumption that if you aren't grinding through some level of misery, you just lack discipline or spiritual maturity.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking a really radical question from our source material today and treating it not as a complaint, but as a diagnostic map for you, the listener.
And it's a great question.
It is. The question we are unpacking is this. Does a life actually have to feel good to be worth living?
Which sounds so simple, but it is deeply complicated.
Oh, totally. So our mission today is to hand you a comprehensive toolkit to understand your own relationship with pleasure, discomfort, and meaning. We're going to synthesize ancient philosophy, effective neuroscience, trauma theory, and Eastern spirituality.
And just a little bit of everything.
Right, just a light, casual Tuesday. But we're doing this to figure out whether your desire to just, sit down and relax is a weakness, or if it's actually a vital biological signal you've been ignoring.
And to even begin debating the philosophy, what makes a good life, we really have to look first at the physical machinery that actually experiences that life, right?
The brain.
Exactly. If you want to understand meaning, we have to start with the biology.
Which is fascinating because for decades, the scientific consensus treated the human nervous system like it was basically just neutral, almost like a blank slate, or a piece of hardware just waiting to be filled with whatever philosophical meaning you decided to download into it.
Right, the whole mind over matter approach. But the work of effective neuroscientists, specifically researchers like Jack Panksepp and Antonio Damasio, it completely shatters that idea.
Yeah, they proved that we actually have an active physical hedonic baseline. Panksepp actually mapped out these primary emotional systems built directly into the mammalian brain. Things like seeking, care, and play, all capitalized.
Yes, and let's break down what that seeking system actually is, because it's not just a metaphor. It's a very real dopamine-driven neural pathway.
It's the physical hardware.
Exactly. It is the biological engine of curiosity, of exploration, and the anticipation of good things. It's that feeling you get when you wake up genuinely excited about a project or maybe a trip.
Okay, so it's not just reacting to stuff.
No, these aren't just reactive systems. They actively shape what you perceive as possible in your environment. But here's the critical mechanism. A dysregulated nervous system, one that is overwhelmed by chronic stress or trauma, literally diverts energy away from that seeking drive.
Wow, so it just shuts it off.
It knocks it completely offline to conserve resources for pure survival. And when that happens, life ceases to feel worth living.
Because the hardware is just off.
Right. Not because your personal philosophy is flawed, but because the biological hardware required to actually value your life has been short-circuited.
So the answer to whether life is worth living lives in the body before it ever even reaches the conscious mind. I mean, I've seen this pop up in positive psychology too, specifically around the concept of flow.
Yeah. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and Martin Seligman.
Yes, them. Flow is that state of just effortless engagement where you completely lose track of time, like when you're deep into a hobby or playing an instrument. And I used to think flow was just about being totally comfortable, like, lounging in a hammock with a drink.
A lot of people think that.
But it's not passive at all, is it?
Not at all. Flow happens at the edge of your capacity. It requires challenge, but crucially, it is the absence of grinding resistance.
Oh, that's a good distinction. Grinding resistance.
Yeah, it's absorption, not endurance. You are exerting energy, but it feels expansive rather than depleting. And that distinction profoundly challenges our traditional glorification of hardship because it proves you can be highly productive and deeply alive without suffering.
Okay, let's unpack this because there is a very famous, deeply cynical counter-argument to the idea that feeling good actually matters.
The hedonic treadmill.
The hedonic treadmill. The theory claims that humans just adapt back to a baseline level of happiness after any positive or negative event. So, win the lottery, give it 6 months, you'll feel normal. Lose a job, give it 6 months, you'll adapt.
Right. The idea that pursuing pleasure is pointless because you'll just get used to it anyway.
Exactly, but thinking about it logically, there is a massive flaw in that argument. If the rule is that we adapt to pleasure and it loses its value, well, we adapt to suffering too.
Oh, exactly.
Right. If adaptation makes pleasure meaningless, then suffering also inherently doesn't matter in the long run. It completely undermines the case for endorsing hardship as a uniquely valuable way to build character.
That is a brilliant dismantling of the treadmill theory, and trauma theory actually completely recontextualizes this entire debate. Thinkers like Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine, and Gabor Mate have shifted how we understand adaptation. Well, van der Kolk's foundational insight that the body keeps the score means that trauma is entirely somatic. When a person experiences chronic overwhelm, the nervous system locks into a state of fight, flight, or freeze.
The check engine light stays on?
The vagus nerve essentially pulls the alarm and just leaves it on. If someone is stuck in chronic contraction, filtering every single moment through a lens of potential danger, their inability to access joy is not some moral failing. It is a state of physiological dysregulation.
And Gabor Mate zooms out to look at how our society actually manufactures that dysregulation.
He does. And just a quick note for you listening, we're simply reporting on Mate's framework here to understand the text, not taking a political stance on economic systems, but he points out that late capitalism structurally traumatizes us.
Right. According to his theory, it demands chronic, endless productivity.
Yes, it enforces isolation, and it literally pathologizes rest. In an environment that demands you act like a machine, your desire to just sit down, breathe, and have fun isn't a sign of shallowness.
It's a symptom.
It is an incredibly accurate diagnostic signal from your nervous system that repair is needed.
So if our biology is literally screaming out for regulation, for safety, and just a little bit of play, how did we end up with centuries of cultural programming telling us that suffering is the ultimate badge of honor?
We really have to look back to the classics for that.
Yeah, to figure that out, we have to trace this back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. Let's look at the philosophers of pleasure versus the architects of endurance.
Let's start with hedonism, which I have to say suffers from terrible public relations today.
Oh, completely. When someone says Epicurean, you instantly picture a billionaire eating truffles on a super yacht.
Yeah, but Epicurus would have hated that. His actual teachings were incredibly grounded, almost monastic.
Right, he wasn't about excess at all. He believed the absolute highest pleasure a human could achieve was ataraxia, which translates to tranquility, or the freedom from mental and physical pain.
He was intensely focused on what he called katastematic pleasures.
Catastamic.
Right. These are stable, resting state pleasures. It's not the thrill of a roller coaster. It's the profound comfort of sitting in a quiet garden with a cup of coffee and a good friend, knowing you are completely safe.
Which sounds lovely. Now, the Cyrenaics, led by Aristippus, were a bit more radical.
Very much so. They argued that the past is entirely gone and the future is just a guess. So immediate bodily sensation in the present moment is the only real tangible good we actually have.
But the crucial overlap between Epicurus and the Cyrenaics is that neither school believed that suffering builds character.
No, not at all.
Epicurus explicitly argued that a person free from suffering doesn't need to build character through pain. You build character through rich friendships, through deep philosophical conversation, and community mutual aid, never through deprivation.
Which brings us to a massive collision of ideas, because the Stoics vehemently disagreed with that.
Oh yeah, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus.
They built an entire framework around the idea that internal feelings and physical sensations just don't dictate the quality of a life. What matters is your virtue, your reason, your duty.
Right. Epictetus famously was enslaved for a significant portion of his life, and yet he taught that true freedom is an entirely internal choice.
His external circumstances were objectively horrifying by any measure of physical comfort, but he argued his inner life, his capacity to choose his response to his captors, was untouchable.
And it is an undeniably powerful framework for survival.
It is. But we have to be incredibly careful here because we must ask, what happens when a survival mechanism designed for extreme duress gets mutated into a cultural ideology for everyday life? Stoicism is a magnificent toolkit for surviving unavoidable pain.
Here's where it gets really interesting because I have a major skeptical pushback for the Stoics here.
Let's hear it.
Yes, Epictetus was enslaved, and he absolutely needed that mental fortress as a survival tool. But Marcus Aurelius was literally the emperor of Rome.
Literally the most powerful man on earth.
And Seneca was one of the wealthiest men in the empire, loaning money at exorbitant interest rates. I mean, isn't it just a little bit convenient for the incredibly wealthy and powerful to preach to the masses that external comfort doesn't actually matter?
The hypocrisy is glaring and is a vital critique. The danger always occurs when Stoicism morphs from a personal tool for endurance into a top-down ideology that endorses pain as a necessary path to meaning.
Right.
The existentialists actually picked up on this exact tension centuries later. Jean-Paul Sartre said we are condemned to be free, meaning we have the terrifying responsibility of creating our own meaning.
It sounds exhausting.
It can be. But Simone de Beauvoir clarified that authentic freedom should be expansive, creative, and joyful, not just a grim march to the grave.
Albert Camus brought this home with his concept of the absurd. He looked at the massive gap between our human hunger for meaning and the cold, random silence of the universe.
The myth of Sisyphus.
Yeah. He used the myth of Sisyphus, the guy cursed to push a boulder up a hill for all eternity, and said, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. We have to make meaning out of the struggle. But wait, Camus never said Sisyphus should actively go looking for heavier boulders just to prove a point.
And that is the essential boundary line. The existentialist consensus is that we must metabolize unavoidable suffering, but we should never seek it out unnecessarily. There is zero intrinsic value in manufactured hardship.
So Western thought seems permanently split down the middle between these two poles, seeking a quiet tranquility in a garden on one side and gritting our teeth while pushing a boulder on the other.
It's quite a dichotomy.
How do Eastern and indigenous traditions reconcile this tension between comfort and spirituality? I imagine it requires a completely different vocabulary.
It really does, and it requires a perspective shift that can be quite jarring for a Western conditioned brain. Let's look at Buddhism. The first noble truth is so often mistranslated in the West as life is suffering.
Which makes it sound like a punishment.
Exactly. The actual Pali word is dukkha, which translates much closer to a pervasive unsatisfactoriness. Think of the modern feeling of endlessly scrolling a social media feed. You aren't in agony, but you are never actually satisfied.
Just a background hum of friction.
Yes, and the Buddha said the root of this friction is tanha, which means craving, clinging, and aversion.
So the goal isn't to embrace suffering, to purify yourself, like in some ascetic Western traditions. The goal is equanimity. It's removing the compulsive terror of losing your comfort so you can just experience things as they are.
Precisely. And Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism takes this a step further. It actually focuses on mahasukha, or great bliss, as a fundamental quality of an awakened mind.
Great bliss.
Yeah. The teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, talked about basic goodness and inherent, undeniable okayness to existence. In this view, discomfort is just the varying terrain of the path. It is absolutely not the destination.
It sounds like the Eastern perspective treats discomfort almost like the weather. I mean, if it rains, you don't waste your energy trying to punch the clouds to make it stop.
No, that would be useless.
But you also don't stand outside praying for a Category 5 hurricane just to prove to everyone how spiritually tough you are. You just grab an umbrella and keep walking.
Let's take your umbrella analogy even deeper.
Mhm.
In indigenous and earth-based traditions, recognizing and honoring your own comfort is actually elevated to the realm of the sacred.
Really?
Yes. In the Yoruba tradition of West Africa, the Orisha Ocean governs sensual joy, sweetness, and beauty.
Mm.
Accessing that joy isn't a distraction. It is spiritually essential. It's how you align yourself with the life-giving forces of nature.
It's beautiful.
And similarly, in South Asian Shak Tantra, physical pleasure known as bhoga and spiritual liberation moksha are not opposites fighting for your soul. They are expressions of the exact same divine field. The body is the temple, and sensation is the teacher.
That is such a massive contrast to the Western religious inheritance, which almost entirely codes bodily pleasure as suspect. We are taught that the body is our lower nature, and that true spirituality means transcending your physical desires.
And the historical context for this is just heartbreaking.
It really is. We see the systematic erasure of ancient great mother goddesses in the text, figures like Inanna, Aphrodite, and Isis. These deities presided over embodied joy, fertility, and the messy reality of human emotion.
And their erasure by dominant institutional religions was essentially the removal of divine permission to just inhabit a body and feel good.
Right. It centralized spiritual authority away from individual experience and handed it directly to institutions.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, reclaiming the permission to inhabit your body, to rest, and to actually enjoy your life is a profound act of spiritual rebellion. It completely upends the assumption that divinity only exists outside of physical comfort.
Okay, so we've traveled through effective neuroscience, ancient Rome, and global spirituality. But let's bring this right down to the ground.
Let's do it.
If you are listening to this on your commute or while folding laundry, how do you apply this tomorrow morning when your alarm goes off?
That's the real question.
Yeah. How do you actually measure if your life is worth living based on all these diverse sources?
We have to start by clearly defining our terms, specifically the vital distinction between discomfort and suffering.
They aren't the same thing.
Not at all. Discomfort is the temporary friction of growth. It's the burn of a muscle you are actively strengthening in the gym. It's the awkwardness of having a vulnerable, honest conversation with your partner. Discomfort eventually passes, and it leaves behind a new, expanded capacity.
But suffering is entirely different. Suffering is structural. It is chronic and identity forming. It's an environment where cruelty has just been normalized, or, a dehumanizing corporate job that grinds you down but just calls it professionalism.
That's the danger zone. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Applies perfectly to discomfort. But it is a toxic lie when applied to chronic suffering.
Because it doesn't make you stronger.
No. Unprocessed suffering doesn't make you stronger. It leaves your nervous system stuck in threat mode, flooding your body with cortisol. It teaches you how to survive, not how to live.
So, what does this all mean? How does a listener actually know the difference? How do you know if you are in the burn of a strengthening muscle, or if you've just lost the ability to realize you are being ground down by a toxic system? Because sometimes you're in it so deep, the exhaustion just feels normal.
The psychological and philosophical traditions give us a very specific map of conditions to test your life against.
Okay.
First, there's meaning over pleasure. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps, proved that deep meaning can sustain life even in the absolute absence of pleasure. But we must be careful. Frankl's experience is a testament to human resilience in extreme horror, not a daily template we should force on ourselves. Meaning is vital, but pleasure isn't meant to be permanently optional.
Then there is connection over achievement. I was looking at the methodology of the Harvard study of adult development, and it is just wild.
Oh, it's an incredible study.
It started in 1938. They tracked two vastly different groups, Harvard sophomores and inner-city teenagers in Boston, and they followed them for over 85 years, tracking their medical records, interviewing their families, scanning their brains.
And what did they find?
The absolute strongest predictor of happiness and physical longevity wasn't their bank accounts, their cholesterol, or their career success. It was the warmth of their relationships. A slightly uncomfortable life with deep, warm connection is vastly more worth living than a highly comfortable but isolated one.
Connection is a fundamental biological need. We also have to test for agency over comfort. Psychologists Edward Dacey and Richard Ryan developed self-determination theory.
Right, which identifies three core psychological needs.
Autonomy, competence, and relatedness. If you feel you have a choice, that you are capable and that you belong, you can weather incredible physical discomfort.
But if you don't,
If you feel trapped and incompetent, all the physical comfort in the world won't make your life feel worthwhile.
and finally, there's presence over transcendence, the contemplative nowness. Just being fully anchored in the present moment, which is actually a state prior to both comfort and discomfort.
And returning to your question of how to tell if you're building a muscle or just being ground down to the synthesis of all these sources, offers a definitive thesis.
Let's hear it.
A life lived in chronic, joyless discomfort is not a badge of spiritual advancement. It is simply a question. If your desires for ease are consistently unmet, it's an accurate biological report that your current structure is wrong for you. It's the check engine light telling you to pull over.
It is not a sign of shallowness to want a life that feels good. It is a sign of life. If you are tired of working incredibly hard for a life that doesn't seem to fit, tired of being told that wanting a break is a weakness, you need to honor that exhaustion. The traditions worth listening to don't tell you to blindly endure more. They tell you to look much more carefully at the life you're actually living.
Before we wrap up, I do want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We talked about how presence is the ultimate state, prior to both comfort and discomfort. But look at our modern world. We've become obsessed with optimizing absolutely everything, and now we are trying to optimize our pleasure and our fun.
Oh man, we track our sleep, we schedule our leisure, we stress over whether our vacations are relaxing enough.
Exactly. Could it be that the relentless, anxious pursuit of trying to make life perfectly fun is actually just another form of craving? Another form of that Buddhist concept of tanha that pulls us completely out of the present moment? Does trying too hard to build a fun life actually prevent us from living a worthwhile one?
Wow. We've turned pleasure into just another stressful to-do list. That is an incredible question to sit with. Whether you are frantically avoiding discomfort or anxiously chasing optimized pleasure, you might be missing the actual, messy, beautiful life happening right in front of you. So the next time that internal check engine light comes on, don't ignore it. And please don't praise yourself for driving through the breakdown. Pull over, check the engine, give yourself permission to find the repair you actually need. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you next time.